Good morning, everyone. My name is Issoufou Soumaila. Today I will be presenting my paper entitled Uranium and the Macroeconomy in Niger, an empirical investigation. Currently, I'm teaching at Northern Light College. I'm also the chair of University Art and the Sciences at my college. So I'm going to start with the outline of my presentation. First, I will discuss the context and the motivation of this paper. Next, I will discuss data, the models that I use, and also the estimation. Third, I will go over the result quickly. And then fourth, I would conclude the presentation with some policy recommendation. So just a little background about the studies. I'm actually originally from Niger, which is a country in West Africa. Niger is by all standard a poor country, even when you compare it to other African countries. The UNDP Human Development Index has constantly ranked Niger as one of the poorest countries in the world. But the country does have, like many African countries, a lot of natural resources, mainly uranium, which the country started exporting back in the 70s. Recently, since 2000, in the early 2000, I would say 2012, the country started exporting oil as well. But with all these natural resources, there is this paradox that the country is still poor in terms of human development. So my paper here, what I'm trying to analyze here is to look to see if the country actually is suffering from the Dutch disease. So the Dutch disease literature is one segment of the overall literature on natural resources curse. Natural resources curse is just like saying like country with a lot of abundant natural resources tend to grow slower than country without big natural resource endowment. And for that reason, there is a big literature trying to see why there is this paradox where country with a lot of natural resources or abundant natural resources tend to grow slowly than countries that do not. So this is what I'm trying to explore in this study to see whether the data is actually there to at least confirm or reject the Dutch disease hypothesis in Niger context. So we use uranium data to test our hypothesis whether there is a Dutch disease in Niger. So our study used a vector or autoregressive VAR and the vector error correction model to try to investigate the causal relationship between some selected macroeconomic variable and the uranium extraction in Niger. So it's important here to know that we only limit to uranium because that's where we have a long time series data. So we use time series data going from 1977 to 2015. So the model, we use actually three models. So all these three models try to capture or at least try to use the theory of the Dutch disease in terms, how the natural resource would actually affect the macroeconomic variable. So the first model, we use VAR, vector or autoregressive model. And then the linkage that we develop according to the theory is that uranium price going up, that will increase money supply in the economy, and increasing money supply would also increase inflation. And inflation, when inflation increases, then real exchange appreciate. So that's the model that we use, the first model to try to investigate that segment or that element of the Dutch disease. Another model, the second model that we use uranium export revenue. So instead of the price, we actually use the uranium export revenue and then try to see what an increase in uranium export, the impact of it on money supply and our real exchange rate and the real income. Okay. So again, that also goes back to the Dutch disease literature, which says when we have an inflow or windfall of money coming to the country, that will raise, of course, money supply in the economy, and that money supply will cause inflation to go up, and that increased inflation would, I appreciate, will make the real exchange rate go up, and then that will make the country orders export to be less competitive, and then that would end up decreasing real income. The third model that we use is the model regarding uranium export again, and the real exchange rate. So an increase in uranium export would actually cause real exchange to appreciate, and then that will cause the current account deficit to increase, and that will cause real government balance to decrease. Okay, so we use this three model depending on whether we have a quantigration. We did the stationarity test and then the quantigration test. So depending on the result, we use model 1, 2, and 3. So these are the data that we use: uranium price, money supply, uranium price, money supply, inflation, real exchange rate, uranium export revenue, real income, real government deficit, and the current account deficit. And then we have the summary statistics, and then the source of the data, where we get the data from. Basically, we get it from the National Institute of Statistics of Niger, and then the database, the BCAO, which is the Central Bank of Western African Country database, and then the World Development indicators from the World Bank. So the result here, the first model, we are able to do the Granger causality test. There are so many results here, but I will just highlight the most important one that I would say here. So one thing that we can say for sure is that based on the Granger causality test, we are able to establish that uranium price could be a variable that we could use to forecast money supply M2. Okay, which means uranium export is an endogenous variable, does explain the variation in money supply in Niger, which kind of in line with the Dutch disease model. Another result that we have, this one from model 1 as well. That's the impulse response function. So according to the impulse response function, we're able to establish that definitely there is uranium price does have some influence in some of selected variable, like money supply, for instance. So any exogenous shock in uranium price would actually would cause money supply to increase in the first 2 years before starting to decrease. Likewise, inflation does increase due to a shock to uranium price. Likewise, the real exchange rate increases in the first year due to a shock in the uranium price, but then we see a decrease in real exchange rate as well. So all these are in line with the Dutch disease literature, which says that there is at least some evidence to comfortably say that there is evidence of Dutch disease in Niger economy. The third model, or the third element that we use is the variance decomposition, and we are able to do it for the three models. One of the things that we can say for sure is that if we look at model 2 under real exchange rate, okay, we can see that for the real exchange rate, if we look at uranium export revenue, even within the 5th year, is able to explain 43% of at least around 44% variation in real exchange rate. So that's really important result because it does show that uranium export does have an impact on real exchange rate. And as we know, based on the Dutch disease literature, is that if there is an inflow in windfall, if you will, of money coming to the country, that will raise inflation, and that increased inflation would cause the real exchange rate to increase. Okay, so we are able to establish this in these studies. Another important thing that I think in this study is that if we look at real government, real GDP here, if you, I'm trying to see if I can maybe move this here, right here. So if you look at the variation in real GDP, we can see that real GDP actually, uranium export revenue, if we go here in this column here, we see it does not seem to have an impact in explaining the variation in government, I would say GDP, real GDP. So uranium export doesn't explain the variation in real GDP. All right. So this is also an important result, which is in line with the Dutch disease literature, is that the windfall of natural resources coming into a country doesn't actually affect real GDP. The only thing it does affect is the nominal variables. Okay, but real GDP doesn't seem not to be affected by this inflow of uranium export, which then again explain again the evidence, which is another evidence that the Niger economy is at least during the period of study was suffering from Dutch disease. So I'm just gonna generally conclude with the study here or the presentation, is that this study we document the relationship between uranium extraction and some key macroeconomic variable in Niger. More precisely, we try to test the Dutch disease hypothesis by using uranium export revenue and the uranium price. The result overall shows that that Niger did suffer from Dutch disease, and this could be one of the reasons that the country did not fully benefit from the uranium export revenue. The result also highlight the role of uranium extraction on creating macroeconomic imbalances in Niger. Next, interim policy recommendation. Since the country is actually not only producing uranium now, but is also an oil producing country, it's really important that the revenue be used to finance some of development programs like education, health, and infrastructure project, road and irrigation. So these are the program that the country is desperately in need of. The country has one of the lowest education level, mortality, infant mortality is still high, and there is a lack of infrastructure and the chronic recurrent droughts. So it's really important to invest also in infrastructure project like irrigation system. One of the most important thing to avoid based on the lesson of the past is to avoid financing, what I call white elephant project, which are, a project that have higher cost of maintenance and with low impact in terms, low impact on GDP. Likewise, government should avoid, which they did in the past as well, is to increase government spending with the money. Definitely avoid borrowing money from abroad in anticipation of future natural resources revenue. This is my presentation, and thank you very much for your attention.